Hey everyone, Docwell here, and in today's video I'm going to be going over Tangos and Salve. I'm going to show you what they do, how to use them, and when to buy them. So first we can take a look at Tango, and it costs 90 gold, and you get 3 charges when you buy a set of Tangos. That means that when you buy one Tango, it's actually 3 Tangos. That's why we call it a set. And they actually are a basic consumable item, pretty cheap overall. That means when you use these 3 charges, they disappear from your inventory. And what those charges do is they allow you to consume a tree to gain 7 health regen for 16 seconds. And consuming an ironwood tree doubles that heal amount. An ironwood tree is the tree that gets planted or is created when you use an iron branch on the ground. So that's why you can see that combining Tango with iron branch early on gives you a lot of regen. You can have this in your inventory for stats, and then you can have the Tangos just for regen. If you want a little bit more regen, you can combine those two together, which is a lot of regen actually over time. But obviously it's not a burst heal, it's regen over time, and the way to get a pretty quick burst heal is to actually go for a healing salve. And so this is the other item that we can take a look at. So healing salve costs 100 gold, and that's 10 more gold than the Tango, and what this gives you is 30 health regen over 13 seconds, and that's compared to the 7 health regen over 16 seconds from the Tango. And if you add this up, healing salve gives you a little bit more health overall. But the trade-off here is that if you are attacked by an enemy hero or Roche, you actually lose the effect of healing salve, where Tango, you can just consume a tree and stay in the lane, keep hitting creeps, keep harassing or getting harassed. Doesn't matter. You get this regen no matter what. Where healing salve, you have to kind of back off the lane, make sure you're in fog, away from enemies so you don't get hit by any spell or right click, so that you don't get it canceled, so that you don't waste this gold, waste this extra regen that you're getting from the salve. So that's kind of the trade-off. Where the Tango, it's a little bit slower because you can't really stack the Tangos on top of each other. You have to eat them one at a time. So when you use this one charge, you have the 2 extra charges. You actually have to wait until the Tango charge is done to consume another one. You don't want to overlap them because that's wasting the Tango charge. You can only have one active at a time. So you can see the trade-off there. This is more burst heal. It's a little bit more heal overall, but costs a little bit more gold, but does have a trade-off because you have to back away from the lane and from creeps. You have to be careful. Where Tango, you can just do everything that you want to do while just getting extra regen, and you have those 3 charges. And for the most part, Tangos are a little bit more popular right now, at least in this meta, than healing salves. And a few years ago, healing salves were even more popular. But Tangos just are a little bit better for making sure that you can lane, you can stay in the lane, have a little bit of extra regen there, where healing salves are all about that burst heal to make sure if you're really low, you can come back to full health very quickly without having to return to base. So they have a little bit of a different function, which I'll talk about in a minute after we take a look at how to actually use them. So to show you how Tangos and salves work, I decided to pick Crystal Maiden because low HP supports really love the regen. Every hero does, of course, but it's more cost effective, obviously, the lower HP you have. Plus, supports love to give Tangos and salves to their allies in the lane. So I'll show you how that works in a minute. But if we look at the basics tab here, we can see all these consumables, and they usually have item numbers in the bottom right-hand corner just to show you that there's a limited amount of these items in stock. We can see it says they're stock 4, stock 8. So if we buy one, the stock is decreased, but they start restocking as soon as we buy them. So it's usually not an issue that you run into in most games where people are buying too many Tangos or salves. But if there's a lot of harass in multiple lanes, you can see people spamming Tangos and salves or something like that, so you may actually run out of regen. So just keep that in mind. That is something that can happen in certain games. So to use these items, it's actually really straightforward. With the Tangos, we just walk up to a tree. We can see that right now we have 2 regen. When we eat the tree, now we get 9. We can see the buff right here is just counting down. It doesn't get canceled when we get attacked by an enemy. So we can see the axe attacks there. It's still going. But if we use a salve, we can see this regen is a lot quicker. It's a lot more in a very short burst. But if we get attacked by this axe here, it cancels that buff. So that's why we have to be a little bit careful when we use salves to back off and away from enemies, where we can just use Tangos in the middle of the lane to regen while we're still last hitting creeps or harassing, etc. Now, in terms of using these items on allies, we can see that if you just use a salve on an ally, it just gives them the buff. But the key is it actually lasts for half the duration. So it's actually half the regen of what it normally is. So it's not as cost effective, but if you are a support and you're coming back to the lane after, let's say, you just died in a fight to the death and your carry still survived but low HP, sometimes it can be cost effective just to give your carry that little burst heal from a salve, just so they can stay in the lane, keep last hitting before the enemy comes back or something like that. So it's not super popular these days, where in the past it was extremely popular to use these salves for allies just because it's not as cost effective, but you can still do do it, and it still happens sometimes. Then the other thing that's a little bit more popular actually is to use tangos to give them to allies. So if you use the tango on an ally instead of a tree, you actually just give them a charge. You can see this shared tango there appears in their inventory. If you give them two, they actually have two shared tangos, but they take up separate spots. So it's one of these things that it's not something where you can just stack a bunch of shared tangos on allies, because they can only have a certain, obviously, number of spots that are taken up, and they usually have other items. Plus, there's this timer that counts down, so they have to use these tangos within a certain amount of time before they just completely disappear from the inventory. And so when you have tangos in your inventory, you do have to make sure that you're not stacking them on top of each other, which can be something that causes you to waste a lot of regen if you have a bunch of shared tangos. Because if you just walk over here, let's say, and you eat a tree, you can see it starts counting down, I get the regen. But if I eat another tree, it just resets that timer. It doesn't give me the double duration if I eat them really quickly. So just keep that in mind. It's something where you have to use this slowly. You don't get double the buff by eating two of them or all three of them at the same time. And then the same thing happens with Ironwood Branch. When we plant this tree here and we eat it, we just get double the duration. We don't get double the regen. We still only have 9 regen. We just get double the duration. So keep that in mind. And the same thing is true with shared tangos with allies as well. So, you know, you can see pretty obviously the healing salve is just for burst heal, but does offer a little bit of danger in terms of harassment. And the tango is a little bit more diverse, a little bit more popular, more in stock, that you're using in a lot of different ways to just maximize that regen in the lane. Then we usually talk about which heroes like to buy which items, but pretty much every single hero in the game is going to buy tangos as a starting item. It's just kind of guaranteed. You can actually wait to buy tangos until after you buy some other starting items for, let's say, the rune or something, and then just fly yourself some tangos with that starting gold that you get from getting those early bounty runes. That is something that a lot of carries do like to do, but for the most part, you're going to start with some kind of regen component on almost every hero. Maybe some mid heroes, like maybe a Necro just decides not to go for tangos for some reason because feels like, you know, you don't really need it in this lane, you're not going to get harassed or something. You can do that occasionally, but for the most part, everyone's going to start with tangos. And then salves are a little bit more rare, at least in these patches in the last couple years, when they nerf them for sharing and stuff like that. They're just not as popular. They're more in those specific situations where you're really low and you need to burst heal in a specific situation where you're coming back to lane and you're giving it to an ally or something like that, or you just really are super low and you don't really want to walk all the way back to base and then TP back to lane, or maybe you don't even have TP, so you can't walk there and then walk all the way back. That's just a super waste of time, so you fly yourself out of healing salve to make sure you just pop yourself back up to full. There are those specific situations that healing salve is really good, but tangos are a little bit more popular right now for pretty much every hero. And then I did briefly want to comment on one specific hero that loves healing salve. Something like an Oracle really loves healing salves because when you cast them on yourself or allies when you're ulted with Oracle ult, you actually don't take damage and you can just keep the full duration of the salve going, and actually amps up that heal, just allows heroes to survive way more when they have a healing salve on them. So just keep that in mind. That's a very specific hero that likes healing salves, where a hero like Medusa, this hero actually doesn't buy any regen in terms of HP because you're probably just going to use mana as your main HP resource with the way the hero functions. So you actually don't really buy tangos or salves on this hero almost ever. There might be a case where you actually weirdly get low HP when you're low mana in the lane, but you'll probably regen that up over time, or maybe, you know, your ally can just give you one quick tango to regen your HP up, because mainly your mana is your HP, and so that's a hero that's the opposite, where you pretty much never buy regen on this hero. And so there are weird situations like that, but for the most part, you're just buying tangos early, and then salves or burst heal. And then salves you can buy later on in the game if you are in, let's say, the fountain and you are regenning and you want to get back to the fight really quickly and you're low HP and it's taking too much time, you can quickly buy a salve and just use it. And so all heroes really like to do that as well in these very rare situations. And then the last thing to talk about is, when do we buy healing salve versus tango? When do we actually want to use these? We already talked about that a little bit. Tangos are definitely an early game item, a laning stage item for sure, but you pretty much don't ever buy tangos after like 5 or 6 minutes. You know, after the lane is over, you just rely on natural regen. If you're like a support that really needs HP regen, doesn't really care about mana as much, you're probably buying tranquil boots and you have boots by then. Or maybe you do have mana boots, but you have some other way of regenning, or you don't really take a lot of harass after that because you're sitting in the back. You're either dying or you're not taking a lot of harass in general. And that's the same thing with carries. Usually you buy some kind of like Battle Fury or other item that gives you some kind of regen that allows you to stay on the map. Or maybe you hit 6 and your 6 timing is huge for regen, or you just get more levels and you get more regen over time. So that's why tangos in terms of regen is really only like a first 5 minutes of the game type of item. Whereas healing salves have become more of like a late game kind of item, because yes, sure, you can still use them in the lane. They're just not as efficient as they once were. So people are using them, like I said, instead, if they're in fountain, they just need more regen really quick, or there's a damage over time spell that they're really trying to out regen at the very last second to just survive on a couple HP, you can use healing salves in those situations. But the main one is later on in the game, if you're winning the game and you take a fight on the enemy side of the map, now you want to push tier 2, push high ground, take Roche. You want to do some kind of objective, but you're pretty low HP, you're 10, 20% HP. You have some regen, of course, like you have some item that's giving you regen, you have more HP regen later on in the game, but you just want to get more regen pretty quickly. You just fly yourself a quick healing salve just to make sure you're at, 60, 70% HP instead of like 40% HP, 50%, which is good for taking those objectives. You just feel a little bit safer if there's like one enemy hero alive or something like that, or when they respawn, you're not as low, so they can't just like jump and burst you really quick. Or you can take Roche, and someone has to tank Roche usually, so it just allows you to regen up while that's happening to make sure you're ready for the next fight, or you're ready to stay on the map when the enemy respawns. And that's really the main difference between Healing Salve and Tango. Tango, early game item that you're buying in the lane, allows you to last hit, stay in the lane, harass more without really having much risk, where Healing Salve is for those niche situations where you're really low and you just need a burst heal because otherwise you can't lane, you can't go back to the creeps, you can't really do anything or interact with the enemy in any way because you are so low and you don't want to wait for the full duration of those Tangos to actually get that regen. You just need a burst heal very quickly. And later on in the game, when you want to stay on the map, take objectives, those kinds of things, that's where Healing Salves come in, and they really come into play in that later portion of the game where Tangos really drop off after 5 minutes. You just don't buy them anymore at all. And that's Tango and Healing Salve. I hope this helped you better understand the items and when to buy them. As always, guys, if you like the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.